Okay.
We're good?
We're good. Awesome. All right. So.
Hold on. Before you begin.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want you to run your affirmative case before I'll do my rebuttal.
Yeah. I was going to.
Okay.
All right. Good to go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome. So first off, go Predators. We got the win today. Got to get that out of the way. Thanks, Joe, for taking the debate. It's part of debate number 3 that we've had. Pretty fun, pretty productive, pretty smart discussions, I think, every time. And I hope, and I don't doubt that this will be the same. Thanks for anybody that's watching or anybody that will watch. So I'm gonna open this up with the story here. So Peter Singer, when he gives talks, TED Talks, different forums about ethics, he tends to start with a specific story that illustrates the moral imperative of his ethical system. Several years ago, there was a young girl in China that wandered into traffic and was struck by a car. She was lying on the road, bleeding out for several minutes. Pedestrians, motorists, all sorts of people looked at her, walked by her. We have camera footage of this, but didn't help her. So she laid there for about 10 minutes before there was a street sweeper that finally did something, rendered aid, and called the authorities. By that point, it was too late. She died. She died on the way to the hospital. Now, people hear this story, and their first instinct is to imagine that, well, it's disgust. Their first instinct is disgust that a bystander would allow this to happen. Next, they move on to they think about how they might have done something different. And I don't doubt that you or anyone watching would have done something different. I'm sure you would. I'm sure you would have rendered aid. The point is, when the suffering of a person is apparent to you, the need to end that suffering is an easy choice. More so when there is not a great burden placed upon yourself to end that suffering. In the case of the child, the only thing that anyone had to do, this is his line, is dirty their shoes. Literally walk out onto the street and make a phone call to end this girl's suffering. Now, according to the CDC Foundation, not the Center for Disease Control, but the CDC Foundation, a private charity, 627,000 people die of malaria every year. The most vulnerable people to this disease are pregnant women and children under the age of 5. The cost of a mosquito net that has been proven conclusively to lower the risk of contracting this disease, saving lives, is $5 American. This is the principle that is at the heart of Singer's applied ethics. There is a moral imperative to maximize the alleviation of harm for other people. Now, this conclusion relies upon the premise that behind a Rawlsian veil of ignorance, every person is of equal moral worth. The suffering of a person in Africa or in South America or in anywhere else, it doesn't matter where you are, matters just as much as the suffering of your next door neighbor. All suffering behind a Rawlsian veil of ignorance ought to be treated equally. Now, what's important to note here is that Singer does not advocate for some sort of planned or socialized form of wealth distribution. He is actually critical of capitalism. I think there are a lot of people that are. However, he sees it as the best way to generate the wealth required to meet the ills of the world. So to give an example or a little thought experiment, if you had a surplus of wealth, applied ethics does not mean that you should be compelled by force to give that away. In fact, if you have reason to believe that the reinvestment of that wealth would generate more wealth in the future, and thus more wealth to give away, you are actually morally obligated to do so, to generate more wealth to give away. It's only when you kind of when you don't have a reasonable expectation of a return on investment. I know that if I was to come across $100,000 today, I'm not an entrepreneur. I would not really be able to make greater wealth. So I ought, in his view, to give it away. So living in such a fashion is not easy. In a lot of ways, this casts doubt on luxury goods as a whole, that which is unnecessary. But I think that oftentimes living in an ethical fashion is not easy. Theories of morality and ethics wrestle with the problem of what is the best way for all inhabitants of this earth to coexist together. When you divorce yourself from the circumstances of your life where you are now and place yourself and everyone else on equal footing, there is no better system, no more effective system of minimizing harm than Singer's applied ethics. Thus, it is the best. And I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, I would like to thank you for this. I'd like to thank the ladies and gentlemen that are watching, even though it's probably one person. And I know who you are. I see you. You don't know that I see you, but I see you. So the dog just start barking. So I want to start off. The topic of our debate is foundational to our moral landscape and most of all ethical theory. The burdens. As the negative, I must only prove that the affirmative case is not that great. I don't have to prove that it's absolutely false by any means. I just have to prove that it's not that great. And I'm going to start off on doing nothing but rebuttals. So, you talk about the moral imperative of this system, and you give this great lecture about the Chinese girl struck by a car, lying on the road, bleeding out. All sorts of people looked at her and walked by her, but didn't help. Right? That's easily explained with psychoanalysis and with psychology. Both of those will easily explain. We can have an evolutionary psychology look at this and state that, we have the bystander effect because we have to be wary of this. It's not a moral imperative for us as much as it is them, right? But on my side of the stage, I have to look out for me first. And that's kind of like the foundations of the self-interest that Adam Smith talked about, is I have to look out for me. And then you said that it's a burden, that they wouldn't dirty their shoes, and that's not at all what happened. They're just wary. They're not cognizant of the situation. I mean, with the bystander effect, it's a social psychological phenomenon in which individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely it is that anyone will help. I mean, when you're looking around, like, are you going to help? Are you going to help? Are you going to help? I mean, it takes time for that cognition to pop, especially in something tragic. I mean, it's perfectly rational to assume that there is a biological response to something so awful happening around you that you will literally freeze in shock or fear or shame. All of these are very good explanations for that, where we don't have to bring an ethical theory on top of it. Then you bring in the CDC Foundation, 620,000 viable area, most vulnerable are women and children, women who are pregnant and children, and how this explains his supply ethics. Now, here's the issue with his supply ethics. His supply ethics go only as so far as to what is commonly known as cosmopolitan liberalism, right? And it's something that really came about in the neoliberal era, something like U2's Bono, you would consider him a cosmopolitan liberal back in the day, which now he's a full-blown self-interest capitalist. So the thing about agreeing and disagreeing with this ethical theory is that you can agree, yes, if we take the utilitarian stance at it, that no, you should not be able to take money from the rich person because he will be able to invest it. And that will make everything better in the long run because he's invested his money. That's 100% true. And then you said it's within a reasonable expectation. Now, see, this is the issue when it comes to these really vague statements. What is a reasonable expectation? Because we can go to the broken window fallacy, which is analogous to this. And I'd have to say that what's better, that the person whose window is broken, who has to pay the person to come over there and fix the window, and that's how we have the money multiplier go out into the system, or is it the actual shopkeeper himself who gets to keep the money from the window not being broken? Will that be spent better? Most of the people would assume that it's spent better by that person. Now, the reason why that's analogous is because we don't know what happens to that money once it's gone. That rich person may buy a luxury that me and you do not understand, but that luxury good may actually lead to someone down the line who does good with that. So it's not a strong enough statement to say that is a reasonable expectation. There has to be some anchor to that statement. And if there is none, it's a useless statement. And then it can just easily be used as a hammer to pick and choose who you want to be the rich and who you want to be the poor. Now, I'm going to make my case. And my case is that there are two value systems that you can use: Darwinism and transcendentalism, right? I'm going to make one argument per. Just keep it really simple. Why do I value Darwinism? I value Darwinism as an economist, as someone who understands supply and demand, who understands how we implement our scarce resources throughout society and as a good, right? So one of the foundational errors to neoliberalism and liberalism in itself, and I mean liberalism not as the current term of progressivism, I mean it as in like the classical liberal sense, is that it relies heavily on equality and egalitarianism. That is useless for society. Society is not driven by the bottom 20%. The bottom 20% does nothing but hold back society from a Darwinistic standpoint. The top 10% of the bell curve in IQ, those are the ones who are going out, making the differences, and extending the standard of living for humans. And if we take a utilitarian analysis nested in our Darwinism, we could understand that we don't need to apply anything to the bottom 20%, and in fact, they could die off and the world would be better. Now, my second argument is transcendentalism. This is my preferred argument. Something I'm actually trying to do is build a system of economics which relies on social Darwinism, but has a moral, eternal anchor. The problem with Peter Singer's morality is, like I said, it's very wishy-washy, it's vague, it doesn't have any anchor to it, and as long as we have a eternal moral anchor, God, then we will have no more questions. For instance, the abortion debate, right? The abortion debate is very simple. Abortion should be illegal because it's wrong, it's killing. No matter the age, no matter the problem. And here's the thing: when that gets pushed onto the person who takes a deontological standpoint, they're usually stuck at, well, what if it's causing harm to the mother? Who then should we choose? Now that's a dilemma for the deontologist. But the person who has the eternal transcendent anchor for the morality can fall back on that anchor, can fall back on that transcendent moral authority and go, let's look into a text. Let's see what God said about this. And then we can know through Jewish law and it's passed down through Christianity that if the mother is endangered due to the child, the mother is always chosen over the child. I guess you could say it's part and parcel with the divine command theory. It lays out explicit goods and bads. So with that, I actually want to hear more of yours because I was hoping you would get into some other deeper ethical theories.
What did you want to hear?
Well, I was one of the criticisms I have of Peter Singer, in my case, is that he doesn't believe in objective ethics, and he says they're subjective. And I find that, from both standpoints, I find that absolutely wrong. And it goes back to the debate that we had about natural rights. If a person can rationalize it, I'm going to let you rebut this. So if a person can rationalize the idea of right and wrong, then we can, through reason and logic, find out what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. Therefore, there is not an arbitrary statement or subjective statement put on the morality. We can have objective morality even without a transcendent being. So I just don't understand why his utilitarian ethical theory has that, because it has no basis for ethics other than subjective preference of sentient organisms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so going rewinding a little bit, trying to tackle what you said in the order you said it. So the definition of a reason to believe that an investment of a sum of money would generate a greater net gain. And that's based upon honestly, it's based upon an individual's business acumen. And yes, it absolutely will fail sometimes, and other times it will succeed. If you believe in the free market, over the long term, it will result in a greater net gain of wealth. All right. So in the short term, yes, there could be a problem there, but over the long term, in terms of minimizing harm, in terms of minimizing pain, deferring to that individual action is the more moral choice. And I think if there's morality in capitalism, then it kind of goes hand in hand with this. I think it's just applying that morality in capitalism. It's directing that. It's directing that force, so to say. So moving forward here. So Darwinism as a value system. So I would disagree that Darwinism is a value system at all. I suppose you could take the works of Darwin and try to draw out some sort of conclusion, some moral conclusion about that. And we absolutely can. It's worth noting that Darwin in himself, Darwin's works was descriptive in nature. Moral and ethical systems are prescriptive in nature. So trying to bridge that gap, right, between what is so I'm gonna go back to my first point. Are all people or all persons of moral equal worth? You say no, and then you cite bell curve or IQ, and I think that on a macro scale, all of those distinctions are arbitrary. There's no proof that the person with the highest IQ would actually survive. I could imagine a scenario where someone with a lower IQ but is better at running fast could survive. So are we going to place a greater moral imperative on running because, you know, they could be a great sprinter and outrun cheetahs in the Serengeti? And that's the foundation for that assertion that all people are of moral equal worth behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance. Now, moving on to what was the word you used?
Transcendental.
Is that a thing, or is that a thing that you made up? I haven't heard of that.
No, that's a legitimate statement. Mathematics, like e to the x is a transcendental number.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard the word. I haven't heard it in that context.
Right. Well, God is transcendent above the universe.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I think that your statement wasn't quite right. That Singer asserts there are no objective morality. I think the more accurate statement would be there could be objective. What his Singer stance actually is, there could be objective morality, but we as humans, it would be very difficult, nigh impossible to actually figure that out. So just quick Googling this right here. And I'm getting a number, and I don't know if this is accurate because it's just the first thing that popped up. There are 33,000 sects of Christianity in the world. That's a whole lot of disagreement. And they're all, or at least I would be willing to wager, the overwhelming majority all are drawing from the same source material. Claiming the mantle of objective morality requires a greater burden of proof that I think any Christian apologist has ever met. When you claim something objectively, that's without doubt. This is for sure the way that we ought to be going about things. And even in the Christian community itself, 33,000 different sects, 33,000 different disagreements about what these two books say. Drawing out anything objective from that, to me, is very difficult. I don't even how you cite Jewish law, but how do you even determine, for example, which Jewish law do you use and which Jewish law do you not use? Do we just go by the Council of Nicaea? Do we, there are many texts that didn't even make it into the Bible. Is it just what has survived and is consensus? But go ahead. I'll pass it back to you.
I'm going to start off real quick on that statement right there. You committed what's called a genetic fallacy, because you cannot disagree with the point because where it comes from. You cannot say there's 33,000 different sects of Christianity, therefore all of them are wrong because there's a disagreement between them. That's a genetic fallacy. You can't do that. That does not make logical sense. Because if we take at minimum one is right, do we know which one is right? Well, that's up to the person and that's up to God. It's not up to me, right? Secondly, those differences in sex are rarely about something as morality. Typically, and I say this with pretty sure stance, even as a Unitarian, they're for the most part all objective moralists. They believe in objective moral values. And to the point about you've never seen Darwinian philosophy applied in that manner. Spencer from the University of Chicago was influenced by Darwin, and it was indeed Spencer who coined the phrase survival of the fittest, not Darwin. Spencer's Darwinian ideas applied to society was that natural selection was already at work in social life. Those who were wealthier, in Spencer's eyes, naturally more fit than those who were not as well off. An argument revived with vigor in the United States in recent years, who has also been postulated by Jordan Peterson of University of Toronto. And a lot of behavioral psychologists will all agree. When we talk about the highest echelon of people in the United States for the wealth and things of that nature, it's based on IQ. Even people who are giving them money in the beginning, Donald Trump. You can make a lot of arguments about Donald Trump does a lot of stupid things, but Donald Trump cannot be in the situation that he is in without a very high IQ. And we know that to be a fact. The correlation level to IQ and how well you do in life is one of the strongest pieces of psychometrics that has been done. It's the foundation for psychometrics in all reality since the 1960s. That metric is what all other metrics in psychology are bounced off again because it's just an absolute. So, we really got to worry about that. Now, you really tried to bring down the point of our Darwinianism with your Rollsian veil. That's not the statement. That's not true, because you could state that, well, this value should be higher, that he's faster in running. That's picking apart at the micro and applying to the macro. You cannot do that. At the micro level, there may be some distinct differences, and we can see that through the survival of the fittest and through what we have now as evolutionary. But we still see at the top of the dominance hierarchy in society today, it's based on IQ. Now, IQ typically comes along with a lot of other added abilities. People with high IQ tend to be more healthy. People with high IQ tend to be less prone to mental illness. People with high IQ are less prone to addiction. People with high IQ tend to pick up industriousness and can bounce between agreeableness and disagreeableness for whatever situation that they need to apply to. That leads them to being the most successful. And that's what the point of a high IQ does from a psychometric standpoint.
Okay.
So there. And again, I want to point out that, and I never got to drive this down about his supply ethics, but in his book, he talks about bringing charity to Africa as a way to champion. The problem with that is that something Bono did, and I brought up Bono earlier, and I want to go back to Bono because Bono has recently become probably the biggest purveyor of capitalism in the world. He wants capitalism to come to Africa because Africa does not need charity. One, it disincentivizes people to work harder, become more industrious, and raise their own IQ levels because it doesn't work like that. They need to do that. As long as we're giving them stuff, they have no incentive to be better. So I find that to be a disgusting thing to do. Secondly, they need capitalism because it's not the greatest environment for agrarian society. It's just not. And it's only going to get worse if you believe in global warming or if you don't. Right? It's only going to get worse if global warming happens. It's not going to be as tropical. The desert's probably going to grow. And they're not going to have any more food. In fact, they're probably going to have high levels of famine. Third, the problem with giving them stuff is that it gets taken by these warlords, and these warlords are not sharing it with their people. You and I have some experience with this, where we would go out and we would give people in Afghanistan things, and we know for a fact that that village elder, where did he go? Did he go to the people? Often not. Because he is the leader of that village, and he's going to take what's his because he's highest in the dominance hierarchy. So, and in Africa, it's far worse because they have less care for family in Africa as they do in Afghanistan. So, under those conditions, I find his need for charity there to be wrong and more industrial revolution. Capitalism needs to be involved and needs to go in there.
You good? You threw a lot at me, so let me try to take it one at a time, as I tried to do before. So starting out, the genetic fallacy. I don't think that we're actually in disagreement here. My point was, yes, one of those sects of Christianity could be objectively true. And my contention is, how do we discern what that is? God, by its very nature, is supernatural. You can't, at least in so far that I have seen, and I would love if you could prove me wrong, empirically prove God's will or God's intention or even God's nature. That is a question beyond empiricism. And when you're claiming objectivity, right? Empiricism has its problems, but I think if you're claiming objectivity, you should route it in empiricism on some level. even if rationally you could prove God's will, I think that's a pretty large hurdle to jump over. Now, to your points about the correlation between IQ and income, again, I agree with you. People with higher IQs are going to generate more income. All right. That does not make their moral worth greater, because it doesn't factor in unchosen circumstances. Do you know what else correlates with high IQ is being born wealthy? That's a pretty well-established fact that poverty can have a detriment to your IQ. Not having enough to eat could no? Well, we're gonna have to throw our sources. We're gonna have to throw our sources out. That poverty. It's my assertion that poverty correlates, and I would say is caused by, on some level, or could lower IQ. But again, we'd have to throw our sources out there if you want to take contention with that stance. Now, to me, that is, and honestly, it's a tangent because it's not even really relevant to the issue. What Darwin says is what the core tenets of his theory is those who are most able to adapt will survive. There is nothing to me that says that your ability to generate capital will maximize your ability to survive. Who survives and who doesn't survive it's far too random for that. Yes, in the past 100,000 years since the rise of hominids, intelligence has been absolutely critical to our survival as a species. For 250 million years or 3 billion years before that, where there was life, intelligence didn't really matter that much. There absolutely could be a certain set of circumstances where your ability to be intelligent or your ability to generate capital is irrelevant to your ability to survive. And if that is your basis for having more moral worth, that falls short to me. There's one thing that there's one more thing. What was the last thing that you talked about? Okay, yeah, I remember now. So effective altruism. So people can't participate in capitalism if they're dead, if they've starved to death, if they've died from malaria. You can't do it. So yes, I agree that bringing capitalism to Africa, it was actually a great application of effective altruism. If it lowers suffering, then by all means, we should do it. We should look for ways that we can generate profit, generate wealth from that nation. Effective altruism is not an argument against capitalism. It's merely minimizing harm. It's minimizing hurt. And if you starve to death, or if you die of malaria or some terrible preventable disease, or if you live in blindness your entire life because of some disease that could be cured in a relatively more prosperous nation, that's pretty harmful. And if bringing capitalism alleviates that harm, then by all means we should do that. So yeah, we got 11 minutes left. So you wanna, we'll take 5 and 5.
Yeah, I guess we'll do that. That's fine. So I want to go back to that Darwinism, and again, we can post the sources. I mean, IQ is genetic. We all know IQ is genetic. So if you're saying that the rich people tend to have higher IQs, you're absolutely right. And I made that abundantly clear that no matter the wealth of the person, their IQ will be the determining factor. Rich people do have children because it always regresses back to the mean, and those children tend to not stay in their high-level socioeconomic realm, and that's a fact. We've watched income tax brackets since the 1960s, and we've seen over 74% change in the top 20%, and it will continue to change. That's why capitalism used to have the nickname from cuff to cuff, because you could go from one family where you wore cuffs and you had you had your French cuffs and your cufflinks that had your name on it. For instance, my grandparents, very wealthy. My parents, absolutely dirt poor. So capitalism is from cuff to cuff, because you never know what's going to happen. But that's because IQ regresses back to the mean. But it is inherited and it is genetic. So in the statement that people make, and I want to make sure that everybody understands this, the statement that people make that the caloric intake affects IQ is true in a very long-term sense. It's not something like you can take a poor kid from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where the average IQ is 85, bring him to America and stuff him full of food, and he'll miraculously grab at 120 IQ. That's not going to happen. It does not happen. And it cannot happen. The human brain does not work in that matter. It has to evolve over time, because it's not at maximum capacity at all. There was always the statement that we could bring Neanderthal into our current day and age, and they'd be able to function, and they would. They'd be able to function at like a low capacity and live within social norms to some extent, but they would not go be a CEO of a business. They could not, no matter how many years of mathematics training they had, could they comprehend calculus 1, calculus 2, calculus 3, because it's just not in the brain. Next, to the Darwinism about the more moral worth. Absolutely is more moral worth. If you took out the bottom 20%, then the other 80% would do so much better. We wouldn't have as much welfare. We wouldn't have to deal as much with crime, because the bottom 20% does the majority of the crime. I mean, I don't think that's a controversial fact. So at the end of the day, if the bottom 20% was took out, the other 80% would be better. Therefore, from a Darwinian standpoint, again, I'm nesting this within the Darwinian standpoint that I gave you from Spencer from Chicago University, is that it would do better. And I'm not talking about genocide. I'm not talking about euthanasia of this sector. What I'm just saying is that if we stopped caring about them and let them be, then the world would be a better place. Okay. And the last point I want to make about the transcendental being. I mean, again, we both agree that there is an objective moral value within some way.
There could be.
Right. Well, if there could be, there is. We can establish that through modal logic, and I don't really want to run that down. Again, we have to go back to that modal ontological statement. Like I said, I don't want to rag that down because it's just time consuming. We can just
maybe next week, huh? We can talk about modal logic.
We can concede to the fact that if there could be, there most likely is. How about that? We'll make a probabilistic statement that there most likely is. And if we're to make a statement about what's most likely, we would find that the most agreeable place for what we would consider rational within our human minds would be Christianity. Because we're not going to say that it's rational for us to pick up the traits of Islamism, because we can know that having women wear burqas made out of like the heaviest wool and polyester on the face of the planet. Again, we've seen it in 120-degree weather. Like that's not like being okay with a religion. That's like a legitimate form of oppression, and we can know through harm and damage that is bad. So we can agree that if there's a reasonable place for there to be a reasonable suggestion of objective moral values, it would fall in Christianity, and therefore, under that frame, we would have objective moral values that we could use to limit the discussions that we have on what's moral and what's not moral, and we would not have to rely on subjectivism.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, is IQ purely genetic? would a massive brain injury lower your IQ?
50 to 75%.
So a massive brain injury could lower someone's IQ. Therefore, IQ is not purely genetic. Could you take someone that is presupposed to high IQ, and could you place them in a really terrible set of circumstances where they don't have enough to eat, where their body does not develop as they should because of malnutrition, where they drink polluted water full of lead or other toxins? And could that person come out with a really low IQ? I think absolutely that is a foundational belief. And what that speaks to, and what is at the core of Singer's philosophy, and what we've had our quibble about, is the fact that all people behind the Rawlsian veil of ignorance are morally equal. Anytime that you want to put raise one group up over another, ultimately it's arbitrary. It just doesn't hold water. You try to cite the ability to generate wealth, but there's too many problems for me to accept that. What was the next thing? You were talking about gosh, I had a point that I wanted to make. Joe, what was like the second to last thing you were talking about? I got 3 minutes. All right. Well, I'm talking to myself.
No, that's not no. Come on.
So, anyway, assuming we are all morally equal, all suffering. This is what I started with. This is what I'm going out with. Assuming we are all morally equal, all suffering is of equal priority. We should alleviate the worst suffering first in the most effective way that we can. Joe, what was the second to last thing you were talking about?
The moral value of a person based on utilitarianism nested with Darwinism.
You're right. Thank you. So you talked about how you're not advocating for genocide. You're not advocating for culling of the population. I don't see why you wouldn't be. If your moral system is rooted in consequentialism, to you the best consequences would be for the lowest set of IQ to just be left to their own devices and die. I think from a consequentialist point of view, you actually do have a moral imperative to go out and cull that population. And to me, I don't know where you draw the line. So you take out the lowest 20%. Well, now there's another new lowest 20%. Why not take them out as well? And I guess until this is bordering on eugenics, which is not really something that I think that we would want to accept in our world.
Right. But I didn't say it.
Well, yeah, but I think that's the implication of your stance. I don't see why you would draw the line at not having genocide. What's stopping you?
I nested my arguments. That was the point that I made in my value system. Was that my value system is Darwinian, but it has a moral imperative based on the transcendental anchor.
That would be nigh impossible to prove. Objective morality.
I think we covered that. I think I've made.
We did, and I still reject it. But maybe that'll segue us to our next debate next week. We'll talk about the modal ontological argument for God. How about that?
I think I'll take that one. That should be exciting. I'm gonna brush up on my modal logic.
Yeah. But hey, thank you, and your daughter's cute. She should be in bed right now, objectively.
I agree. She's way past her bedtime. She's been going to bed at like 9, but today, because of the debate, I had to like.
I got you. Hey, take it easy.